Hello, and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast number 1678. The topic is mindset, and the title is Mental Health Issues Related to Living a Healthier Lifestyle. So what we're going to talk about today, just a general discussion about a couple topics. So I actually have like 8 of them listed here, but I'm sure there's a lot more. But 8 topics that come up when I'm discussing with clients that are limitations and challenges and struggles that the person will face related to mental health in regards to kind of creating a healthier lifestyle. The mental side of creating a healthier lifestyle is very complex. It's very challenging. And it's often kind of the main issue. A lot of times people search out for nutrition programs or training programs, and it's not so much like that is part of the issue. You need to know what to do. But there are so many more complexities beyond that. I know as myself, like a trainer, writing the perfect nutrition program, writing the perfect training program means nothing if the person doesn't do it. So you have to figure out, okay, why isn't the person doing it? How can I get them to a version of the perfect nutrition training program that they actually can do? So say there's like a perfect situation and it involves them eating at meal times that conflict with their regular life. Well, are you going to tell them to quit their job, put their family and everybody else as, lower priorities and never deviate from their food plan no matter what happens? No, it's unrealistic. It's not even healthy for them to try to do that. It's so burnout and it's unhealthy. You ruin every relationship you have. It's just so many negative things to that. It's not practical, but even if you were to try it, it's not healthy. The mindset and mental issues that people struggle with are often the limiters. It's not information. I mean, nowadays, good God, you can get information everywhere, and it's overwhelming to know like what is actually good information. But access to information isn't the problem anymore. It's knowing what is good information. But then once you have the information, how do I actually do it? So what I wanted to do today was just talk through and just have a discussion about 8 topics that I feel are relatively common, and give some maybe podcasts that we have that cover each individual topic so you can kind of check those out. But also just to give awareness that these topics are common. A lot of times people think that they're alone in their mental and emotional struggles, and it's like, oh gosh, no. Everybody struggles with this stuff, unfortunately. But it is helpful to kind of know that you're not alone. That way you can stop beating yourself up, and you can start to be more proactive and start working against it. And that's kind of the idea, is we all have our own limitations in different ways. How can I view my limitation as, okay, I know what this is now. I know that this is something I want to work around. Now can I attack it? Can I start to kind of work around it? Rather than feeling shame for having the limitation, or just like emotions and frustrations, all that stuff that kind of shuts us down. We actually want to be able to be proactive against what we believe could be holding us back. So these aren't in any particular order, but the first thing I have written down here is just motivation and self-discipline. Maintaining motivation to change a lot about your life. Like if you're like, okay, I want to get into training on a regular basis. I want to get into eating healthier. You have to undo a lot of the things you're currently doing. You have to rearrange priorities. You have to rearrange behaviors, make space for better behaviors, actually make space to try to learn the better behaviors. There's a lot you have to do. So the motivation that you need to go through all of that work, it's challenging because motivation is not a one-time thing. You don't just feel motivated and then you stay motivated. Motivation fades. Motivation it absolutely is impacted by our self-care. If you don't eat well, if you don't sleep well, your motivation tanks. Absolutely. So there are a lot of components that go into motivation itself. And one of the biggest things is self-care. And another thing is just the recognition that it needs to be renewed. Motivation is not something that just is perfectly sustainable. It does need to be refreshed. It needs to be renewed on a pretty regular basis, actually. So understanding that can help to where if you start to lose motivation, you don't beat yourself up for not feeling motivated. But then also if you start to lose motivation, you can start to say, okay, what's maybe contributing to that? What does my sleep look like? What does my food look like? What does my stress look like? I talk about all the time that training is stress. Having to eat healthy versus eat conveniently is stress. We're not going to welcome good stress into our life if we're overwhelmed with bad stress. Motivation is challenging. We do have a lot of podcasts about motivation. Something like I want to throw two of them out there. One is podcast 1657. It's a mindset podcast titled Developing Motivation When Working Long Hours. That way, if you're struggling with that, like a very demanding long schedule, that can help you kind of develop motivation within that. And then also Methods to Regain Motivation is podcast 1084. You can find all of our podcasts on our website. We have a podcast player that goes back 300 episodes, but then also instructions under that player on how to find older podcasts. But podcast 1084 is a mindset podcast titled Methods to Regain Motivation. So chances are, if you are struggling with motivation, you probably lost it and you need to regain it. So those would be two good podcasts. But a takeaway on motivation is that it is absolutely impacted by self-care. So you have to, be mindful of self-care. And that no matter what you do with self-care, motivation still ebbs and flows. So you have to be aware of that and schedule or kind of plan to or account for kind of renewing motivation. Now, when it comes to self-discipline, that is tough. Self-discipline is challenging because, again, if we're overstressed, if we're overwhelmed with everything else in life, we are often forced into doing things above and beyond what we want to do. Therefore, then when it comes to an option, like, wow, I actually have a choice, we want to choose the easier option. And again, this makes sense when we view it like in an external, just kind of black and white perspective is, yeah, if I'm tired and fatigued from all the choices I don't get to make, but I still have to do, then when I get a choice, I'm going to choose the easier thing. That makes sense. So what we have to do is to eliminate some of the freedom of choice. That sounds a little insane, but we want to recognize, okay, if I wake up in the morning and I ask myself, do I want to train today? The answer is going to be no. If you're tired and you're having to get up early and you ask yourself each day, do I want to train today? The answer is going to be no a lot more often than you'd like it to be. So we want to make our choices kind of like, okay, I decided that training was going to be helpful for me and it was going to lead to a better future. So I'm getting up this morning and I am training because I've already decided the training was good for me. There's a lot of change in perspective that can actually make a really huge difference in your actions. The way you think influences what you do. And if you're more mindful of creating mental structures that have discipline within them, and like I said, it kind of sounds crazy, but to actually limit the ability to choose, it helps. Because as I said, you're not going to want to choose the best things. You're going to want to choose the easy things. We have a podcast 1375. It's a Q&A podcast titled Learning to Parent Yourself. Excellent podcast. I know I made it, so I guess I shouldn't say that. But I think it's pretty damn good. But it is something like I use Parent Yourself is because I was very blessed, and I'm becoming more and more aware of how blessed I am as I've gotten older and continue to get older and continue to get more experiences, that I have great parents, amazing parents, and they taught my brother and I kind of like tough love. They loved us, but they also loved us enough to push us into uncomfortable places when they knew it was best for us. And the way my parents parented me, I have adopted some of those things. Sorry, Mom and Dad, it wasn't all of them. But I've adopted, let's say an overwhelming majority. How about that? I've adopted an overwhelming majority of what they showed for me and what they kind of displayed and structured for my brother and I. I've used that now to create my own kind of parenting of myself. How do I show myself like tough love? How do I show myself love when I need it, but toughness when I need it? And I was very blessed to have that example through them. And in podcast 1375, I kind of talk about how that parenting of myself, that structure works for me. And it's helped me to achieve some pretty awesome things in life compared to if I would have just always made the easier choice. So that's a very good podcast that I do think would be very helpful for people if you're struggling with self-discipline, is podcast 1375. Now that can be a lot right there, just motivation and self-discipline. But that's only one out of a list of 8. So I'm probably not going to be able to talk this slowly and in depth about each one. But another thing that people struggle with is body image and self-esteem. So body image concerns, like the way people feel about themselves, and that then impacts like self-esteem, that, oh my gosh, it has such a huge negative impact on the choices you make, the proactivityness, I don't know what proactiveness, is that a word? So you're not going to make great choices, and you're not going to seek out opportunities when you feel like you look like crap and you are a piece of crap. Now, I've been there. That's actually the reason why I started working out and doing fitness in the first place, was I felt like I was fat and weak, and mentally and physically, and I just started out of a place of hate, like self-hate. And I was lucky in the sense that it created a momentum for me, in that I hated the way my body looked. I hated of how mentally weak I was to let myself get there, so much so that I destroyed myself trying to fix it. I trained every single day for years on end. I'd say probably easily 3 or 4 years I've gone without missing a single day of working out. Like I've been working out now for, 24 years. I've never missed more than 7 consecutive days. I've never taken a full week off, actually. The 2 times I got the longest would have been, like, say I worked out on a Sunday and then I worked out the following Saturday to make sure I didn't go all the way to a Sunday. So that's the longest I've ever had off, was twice like that. Once was related to a physical injury, once was related to like a mental emotional injury, like anxiety and depression and stuff. So I'm very consistent with training, but that was a lucky response. That was a given to me by God response, that if I hated the way I looked, I wanted to be overly active to correct it. A lot of people struggle if I hate the way I look, why even bother? Who am I to even be able to overcome this? If who I am let me be this way now and I don't like this way, how can I just magically change? And that's a huge struggle. That's a big thing that a lot of people struggle with, is if you think you look like crap, you're going to feel overwhelmed with how far you think you might have to go to look better. I promise you, and I can't emphasize it enough, but you'll be amazed, and I know this personally, of how you will feel if you just get momentum. You don't have to go from A to Z. If you go from A to B, you already feel amazing. So one of the things that holds people back in regards to body image is, if I look like this now, and I think of what I want to look like, you won't only be happy when you get there. You'll be happy that you've started. You'll be happy that you've seen small progress along the way. You'll be happy faster than you think. You'll be happy faster than I know that you think. So it's tough to tell people that, because they don't know it yet. They just don't know yet that, if I want to look like the guy or girl on the cover model, model, like, I don't know, people don't even have magazines anymore. Gotta leave. I'm too old. What is it, Instagram? So if you see somebody on Instagram, the guy or girl on Instagram, and you're like, oh my God, like, that's the perfect body. Where you are now, you won't have to go all the way to what you see on social media to then feel happy. You will feel happy in the process. You'll still want more. You're going to be like, yeah, okay, I've seen some progress, but I want more. I want more. I want more. But there'll be this growing sensation of happiness underlyingly. when you first start, there's 100% that you want more, right? And you've done 0% to be happy about. So 100 and 0. Let's say you do, a good couple steps, you work at it for a couple months, and you can say, okay, I can see I've made some progress. Maybe you've made 5% progress towards your overall long-term, best case scenario goal. You now have 5% to be happy and 95% to want more. You put in more work. All of a sudden you're at 10 and 90, 15, 85, 20, 80. That percentage that you have to be happy about continues to grow, and you'll feel that. It builds more momentum, it builds more motivation, builds more excitement, builds more hunger to keep pushing for more. So you don't have to go 0 to 100 to be happy. You just have to eke out 1%. And then eke out another 1%. And then another 1%. I have done it. I know that that's what you will feel. Okay. Then if we look at the next things, we have, let me see body image and self-esteem. I would like to see if we'll have a podcast about self-esteem. And this is kind of interesting because some of these things, like I touch on a lot with clients, like on one-on-one, but I maybe need to come back and touch on that in a podcast. So I will make a note to do a self-esteem podcast that I think could definitely help. We do have, let's see here, self-confidence podcast. So if I look at that, we have podcast 1007. It's a mindset podcast titled Building Self-Worth and Self-Confidence. So that was back in July of 2021, so it's probably time to update that. But podcast 1007 is a mindset podcast titled Building Self-Worth and Self-Confidence. So if that is something you struggle with, that would be a great podcast to check out. The third point we have is a perfectionist, like all or nothing type mindset. Oh my gosh, that is absolute poison. Poison. If you have this perfectionist mindset, is I'm going all out or I'm not doing it at all. Bullshit. Number one, you're either lying to yourself, pretending to be like aggressive, but really you're afraid to fail. So you're setting it up to where you're absolutely going to fail. Because, damn, how hard would it hurt if you truly, legitimately, 100% tried and failed? That would hurt like hell, right? Can't comprehend how much that would hurt. So we don't even put ourselves in that situation. I'm not even going to fully commit because it would hurt so bad. One of the things I would say back to that is it would only be failure if you stopped. If you look at successful people, read any successful book. I listen to audiobooks all the time. So thankfully I have one of my best friends. He's big book nerd. And when I got into business and him and I started meeting about business, he suggested some books to me. And I had really only read, and this is ridiculous, probably like one book front to back before. I know I skirted through school and all that stuff. But I'm not good at reading things on paper. My mind starts to wander and I have a hard time paying attention to reading on paper. So audiobooks, now that that's a thing, I wish that would have been a thing when I was younger, they're amazing. So I can listen to books while I'm doing dishes, cooking food, doing other odds and ends, and my retention rate for audio is extremely high. It's abnormally high. So I retain information very well if I hear it. That has allowed me to really love audiobooks. So as my friend would suggest books to me, I would listen to the books, I would implement them in business or in my personal life, and you could see and feel the differences, and it's like, oh my gosh, this is addicting. So awesome. So I really got into reading books and listening to books as a way to help myself. And the aspects, it's interesting in the sense that it helped me a lot learn those type of behaviors and self behaviors, have increased self-awareness, that if I'm setting myself up as I'm going to do this 100% or not at all, then that is actually in a way just you're predetermining failure. And as I said, it's only failure if you stop. The reason why I think that's really important is there's so much information, such as through audiobooks, that you never have to stop. There's so much information as in access to like experts, access to people, just people in general. If you can't afford to hire somebody, that's fine. Get on social media, like a group, get with other people that do similar things. There's a lot of free ways to connect with other people, see what they do, and then learn and try that. So failure is only when you stop. And there's so much access to information nowadays, you never have to stop. You can always just look for what's the next thing to try. What's the next thing to try? What's the next thing to try? Setting yourself up as an all or nothing is a cop-out. It's an absolute bullshit cop-out to the fear of failure. Now, there are also people, I work with competitive athletes in various ways, who think they have to be perfect to be successful. And once they're not perfect, they beat the crap out of themselves and just think they're, the biggest piece of crap in the world, and they're never going to be successful, and you're such a loser, and blah, 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 and they get into all these kind of mindsets. And no one is perfect. No one. I've trained people to really high levels. Like I've trained professional athletes, Olympic athletes, like people who won like medals, like gold, silver, and bronze medals in the Olympics. I've trained people who had pro cards in aesthetic sports, which would probably be less than like 5% of competitive people in aesthetic sports. I've trained people to elite totals in powerlifting, which is like less than 1 or 2% of competitive powerlifters actually reach an elite total. So I've helped people get to all those levels. And none of them have ever just, like, they've all made a mistake. None of them have been perfect. None of them have went start to finish and never messed anything up. 0%. Zero. What allows them to be successful is that they do it less and less often over time, so they figure out why they messed up, and then they do it less and less and less and less and less. And that they never stopped. They never stopped. When everybody else stopped, they kept going. They made another mistake, they figured it out, they made it less often. Then they kept going. Then they kept going. Then they kept going. That's what makes somebody successful is not that they're perfect, is just that they never stop. They continue to learn. They're not going to make the same mistake over and over and over and over and then sit there going, I don't know what's happening. They'll figure it the hell out. They're gonna go for it. They're going to figure it out. They're going to work it. They're going to be tough on themselves and say, listen, butthead, you've done this before. You're doing it again. What the hell is going on? How can you work on this? And then they just seek out the answers as much and as aggressively as they can, and then they try every single method until they find one that works. They fail more things than people who fail. What I mean by that is people who fail, they might fail 2 or 3 things, and then they just quit. People who are successful fail 200 to 300 things, but they just kept going and kept going and kept going and kept going and kept going. They continue to fail at things at higher levels. They fail, figure it out, move up. Fail, figure it out, move up. They fail way more than people who are, quote unquote, failures. Because the failures failed 2 or 3 things and stopped. Successful people fail hundreds of things, but they continue to try more. So a perfectionist podcast, if you're looking for one, is... we have a mindset podcast 656 titled Stop Trying to Be Perfect. And that would be a really good one to listen to and learn more about how perfectionism is actually a cop-out. Now, the other things we have, I think I'm actually going to cut this list and make this a part 1 and a part 2. So we're going to stop here, these 3, and then I'm going to come back and do a part 2 of the remaining 4 that we have. Because I don't want to skimp over them, because if somebody really is struggling with these last ones, I don't want it to be so fast that it doesn't really get in depth. So this is actually going to be, now podcast 1678 is actually going to be a part 1, and then we'll come back and we'll get a part 2. But I do hope that discussing these types of things lets people know that you're not alone when you feel these. Other people struggle with this as well, and that there are resources available. And then also, if you need anything, just reach out. I'm always here. I'm always happy to help. I love being able to help other people. Not only does it just feel good, but it helps me help myself as well. So anytime I help somebody else through a struggle, it helps me to manage that struggle on my own to whatever depth that I might be having that. So I really appreciate when people interact with me because it helps me be a better person too. So thank you very much. Okay, so we'll cut it there, and then we'll come back for part 2 in the next Mindset podcast. That'll be in 4 podcasts from now, if you want to check that out. Okay, well, if you have any questions, feedback, suggestions, anything you want to know, let me know. My email, brutalirongym@gmail.com. If you like our podcast, please share it. The more people we share the podcast with, the more people we can help. If you like the podcast, you can support the podcast financially. It does have a high hosting cost on all the different platforms every year, so I appreciate the donations. The people who do donate, thank you so much, because it does go directly towards those costs. You can donate on our website, www.brutalirongym.com. Even just $5 a month, anything, even just a one-time, if you just want to give $20, and say good luck. I appreciate all of it. It allows this to just keep being done every single day and allow us to help more and more people. If you like the information we share in our podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels. On Instagram and YouTube, you can find us, and please follow us under the name Brutal Iron Gym. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.